Aloha, welcome back to Marxist Mondays. We got Marx in the house. Episode 4, we're going to do 4, 5, and 6 today. Here we go.
Welcome to Marx in the House, a series where we talk about gentrification and housing from a Marxist perspective. Let's recap what we talked about the last 3 episodes. We talked about how houses under capitalism are commodities. This means that they're not produced for their use value, but for their exchange value. Land also has an exchange value. Whenever the exchange value is higher than what is actually being charged to people who live there, a rent gap opens. The rent gap assumes that there is a highest potential of land to be used. If I own a property and rent it out to people who run a corner store, I might get $2,000 for rent, right? But if a Japanese, South Indian, Idaho potato fusion restaurant displaces the corner store, I could charge $4,000 for rent. But there's nobody willing to pay more than $4,000. So the fusion restaurant maximizes out the highest potential of the land. Never mind that the food there sucks and the corner store was dope. But this is still a little vague, right? A rent gap opens simply because housing and land are commodities? That's just lazy economics. Remember, here at Marx in the House you get the whole story. Can't afford rent getting gentrified? Marx in the House about to tell you why. Truth of the matter is, there are several reasons why rent gaps open. But there's one that remains the classic reason. Gentrification happens because of a cycle of disinvestment and reinvestment. Today, we're going to talk about disinvestment, which is the sad part. But so is reinvestment if you're working class. The first thing we need to realize is that disinvestment is a natural feature of capitalism. Buildings and homes need upkeep, right? We need constant resources to keep a house clean, fix the plumbing, the AC, yada yada yada. Now when it comes to the use value of a house, it would make no sense to let that happen and not reinvest, right? The plumbing is fucked up, you fix it. How else would you enjoy a fresh hot shower? This is what housing would look like under communism. We would produce for the need of the community, use value. And we would maintain and repair shit that the community would need. But this is not what happens under capitalist social relations. The upkeep of cribs is determined by private property and the profit incentive. Let's see how that plays out. Not great. You're ready for a new layer of theory to add onto your big brain. You might have noticed that I've been talking about land and buildings as separate things, and that's because they're different commodities. They're connected, but separate. This might seem nitpicky, but it's important, and that's because the exchange value of buildings go down over time. As time wears on the material the house was made of, value decreases. Exchange value of land, however, doesn't decrease steadily over time. As we'll see, it actually fluctuates. But so how is the exchange value of a building determined? That's where the labor theory of value comes in. Now, this is a huge topic and not one that I'm going to get into because that would be outside the scope of this series. So you're just going to have to take the following as a fact and watch the videos in the description for more information. For now, just assume that exchange value is determined by the social time necessary to create it, on average. For example, if it takes a society 10 years to build a house, of course the exchange value would be higher than if it takes a society minutes to produce one. Now, generally, in every society, the productiveness of labor increases because of new technological innovations. For example, back in the day, they had to manufacture parts for buildings on site. Now they just mass produce them in factories. This decreases the time needed to construct buildings, which decreases their value. The second reason for the decrease in value is style obsolescence. This just means what's popping on the market. Whereas funky 70s vinyl wallpaper actually added value in the 70s, now they make a crib look corny, so the value decreases. The third reason is wear and tear of a building. Like I said before, a building needs constant repairs to maintain its value. You need to repaint doors and cabinets, but also replace plumbing, roof, a busted AC, you fucking name it. This all corresponds to a cycle of use, which in economic terms is known as a Kuznets cycle, meaning a cycle of use and investment of 15 to 25 years. So in 15 to 25 years, the value of a building goes down because of all these reasons. Now, the way you respond to this decrease in value depends on who the fuck you are, and like I said before, what kind of system you live in. But since unfortunately we live in capitalism, let's look at the main players under the system. If you bought a crib and you're the one living in it, of course you're gonna make repairs whenever needed. You're the user and the investor. You care about the use value and the exchange value. But if you're a little old landlord, you only give a fuck about one thing, and that's rent money. So if you can still get mad rent money and not invest in repairs, hell fucking yeah! Parasites, parasites, parasites. Got it? Cool. Let's kick it up a notch. We've been talking about individuals, but society works on the scale of classes acting in their own interest. So what happens if the housing market is in decline? A lot of landlords stick to a strategy of under maintenance. They stop investing in their cribs, collect their rent money, and watch it go to shit. After all, why would you invest if your property value is going down anyway? But this leads to a further downward spiral. As landlords in an entire neighborhood choose to disinvest, it becomes harder and harder for them to sell their property. No major bank is gonna give out a mortgage to somebody who wants to buy a crib in a neighborhood that's going to shit. And home buyers want low down payment, low interest loans. Wherever banks offer that, that's where people will be buying. And banks offer those wherever there's a lower chance of foreclosure and less of a risk of declining property values. Same goes for homeowner insurance companies. Together, they have the power to redline an area, meaning to divert investment from it. But that's for a little later down the line. Mind you, I said major banks. And that's because for a little while, you'll have shady-ass local organizations that specialize in high-risk financing. But the more the area goes to shit, the less even they will touch it. As the neighborhood spirals down, the landlords try to squeeze out more profit out of whatever space they have and subdivide properties. And unless a shortage of better cribs somewhere boosts the rent up a little bit, the cycle of disinvestment continues. Remember how at the beginning of the series I said that capital movement determines your life? Well, this is it, baby. Because in essence, a cycle of disinvestment just means that more and more capital is leaving the area. Now we're reaching a climax in our neighborhood. At the final point, when landlords don't even earn enough fucking money through rent to cover utilities and taxes, they just abandon the buildings. But if they're extra smart, they'll hire some people to destroy their own property through arson and collect sweet insurance money. See the second episode of Marx on the Mic for that. And thus a neighborhood ends up being completely disinvested, which means there's room for reinvestment and the cycle just goes on. So what are some of our takeaways for today? 1. The cycle of disinvestment that I just described is one of many possible pathways, but it's a classic one. What did we learn? First, banks hold all the fucking power. They decide where money goes and doesn't. They're the key in the pattern of disinvestment, because it's hard to invest without a loan. Another takeaway that hides a little more under the surface is that people don't need to be conscious of their class to act in their class interest. An individual landlord who stops investing in a crib to make more money doesn't have to think about their societal impact on a grand scale. They just do what's best for them. The tenant who struggles against the landlord who evicts them illegally doesn't need to be consciously aware of the class contradictions at play. They can just think their specific landlord's an asshole. There doesn't need to be class consciousness for there to be class struggle. As long as there are class contradictions, there will be class struggle. But only when the working class becomes conscious of itself can that struggle be elevated to a level where capitalism is abolished, socialism is instituted, and a classless society through an even longer struggle gets achieved. And after that, it's use value forever. Actually, no value form at all, but let's save that for another time as well. Hey,
See, with the technology that we have, I don't think it'll take that long. If we decide to make the shift, like to a socialist, communist, RBE style, whatever society, I think it'll just take us wanting to do it. It'll take, a few years or whatever to shift some stuff over and change some things on the computers, but that's about it. From disinvestment to reinvestment, we got episode 5 here.
what up? Welcome to Marx in the House, a series where we talk about gentrification and housing from a Marxist perspective. So last time we spoke, our neighborhood was in fucking shambles. Burned down houses, high rent for shitty small apartments, landlords refusing to make any repairs, yikes. Isn't it weird how a neighborhood can stay this way for decades but change completely in just a couple of years? And isn't it doubly weird how it's the neighborhoods that are the most disinvested get the biggest upgrades? People having a place to live should be a priority for society. We have the resources to do so after all. But instead, we have more empty houses than houseless people. Now I know you already know the reason why. The reason resides in the movement of capital. And yes, thank fucking God we're gonna finally talk about what that means. You're ready, my young Marx. Can't afford rent, getting gentrified. Marx in the house, about to tell you why. When you think of capital, you might just think of money. Like when we say capital investment in common lingo. But capital is so much more than that. It's a process. It's an investment that has profit as its purpose. The magical formula for capital is MCM apostrophe. I'm a capitalist and start my day with a certain amount of money. But I want more money. So traditionally, I invested in the production of commodities, which I sell for more fucking money. So again, I start with money, invested in the production of commodities, remember a thing with use value and exchange value, and I sell them for a profit. And I end up with more money. A video explaining where exactly that profit comes from is in the description. Now, what commodity I put my money in doesn't really fucking matter. All I care about is a high rate of profit and a safe investment. When it comes to capitalism as a whole, even I as an individual investor don't matter. Who cares where I'm from or what my deepest desires are? Global proletarian revolution. All that matters is the process of profit making, which moves in certain shapes and patterns. This is why we talk about capital instead of capitalists. So as an investor, I need a reason to invest in your shitty fucking neighborhood. Cause God knows I don't care about the people in it. Now there obviously has to be some type of turning point that makes me change my mind. If not, all neighborhoods would remain the same, always. And so far, we've only talked about disinvestment and more disinvestment, aka more and more capital leaving a neighborhood. So when does reinvestment start? Well, remember Big Daddy Neil Smith? He found this turning point from disinvestment to reinvestment by looking at the most exciting thing of all time: taxes. Remember the final climax of a neighborhood going to shit? When landlords just milk everything they can out of the house they own by not doing any repairs or paying for utilities? Well, at the final point, landlords even stop paying taxes on it. And actually in a lot of states in the US, and yes, the first part of this video series is going to be very US centric, you can just refuse to pay taxes for years and the crib will still not be foreclosed. So Daddy Smith looked at places where landlords would all of a sudden pay back all their yearly taxes they owed. Curious. Why would they do that? What signal does this send? Reinvestment. Beautiful people, after all this disinvestment, we've made it to the first wave of gentrification. This is such an early little baby wave. At this point, banks are still not willing to provide mortgage capital. This means the investment is riskier, but it's also juicier. So why would people choose to invest in a disinvested neighborhood? Because these particular smartasses have located a rent gap. A rent gap wide enough to make a risky investment worth it. How did this rent gap open up? Well, remember that the rent gap is the difference between potential ground rent and the ground rent you get under the actual land use. This rent gap appears because of capital devalorization, which just means the building's getting more and more fucked up, there are labor improvements in society, and shit is just going out of style. The land value goes up because of continued urban development and expansion, which delivers new value adjacent to the fucked up neighborhood, which then increases the value of the land of the fucked up neighborhood. Who are these first wave gentrifiers who are making these risky ass investments? It's usually a mix of people who form a partnership to lower the risk. This could be a group of an architect, a developer, a building manager, a lawyer, and a broker. They're all related to construction and housing in some way, so they have the know-how, and together they have enough money to put up a little bit of an investment. The broker in the meantime scoops up additional loans from here and there. But even these people wouldn't make this risky investment if it wasn't worth their while. This means the first wave of gentrification only starts once the rent gap is wide enough. This is why gentrification has historically usually started in inner cities, because capital that leaves a place needs to go somewhere. Traditionally in the imperialist core, that's from the inner cities to the suburbs. But don't worry, we're going to explore that more down the line. You can visualize it like this: capital leaves the inner ring for the outer ring. Because of so much juicy, lumpy capital gets pumped into the outer ring, the land that is close to it increases in value. Remember, the buildings may be fucked up, but the land becomes more and more valuable. This in turn increases the potential ground rent. And as land starts to get more and more valuable from the outer ring, the value starts to increase from the outer ring to the inner cities. But of course, these cute little small investments aren't enough. Just because a rent gap exists doesn't mean gentrification is bound to happen. For full-blown gentrification to occur, we need the sweetest of the gentry cream: mortgage capital. Capital is an investment that has profit as its purpose. So mortgage capital means investing money in mortgages while trying to get as much profit from your investment as possible. So if you're a big fucking bank, generally it means safe investments with a guaranteed payback. If you're a small schemy one, it means your mortgage capital goes to people who might default, but you can get crazy interest out of them for a little bit, which can make it worth it if you have enough customers. Long story short, if a bank redlines an area, meaning no finance capital will go there, gentrification can never happen. If a bank then greenlines an area, finance capital will flow there and there's a bigger opportunity for gentrification. So, 1. Rent gap. 2. Finance capital. But even after it's greenlined, we need more. The rent gap needs to be wide enough for developers to purchase buildings for the cheap, pay builders for rehabilitation, and then they have to pay interest on both mortgage and construction loans, and then at the end they need to sell the whole shebang for a sweet profit. And a profit is sweet when it was worth your investment. Once the rent gap is wide enough, it doesn't really matter who's making the investment. It could be these professional developers who purchased it, redeveloped it, and then resold it for profit. But it could also be occupier developers who buy it, redevelop it, and then also live there. Shit, it could even be done by a landlord who rehabilitates a spot to rent it out to tenants. Amazing. You now understand the basic economics of gentrification. Capital leaves a place, disinvestment. Land becomes more valuable around it. The land itself in turn becomes more valuable. A rent gap opens. People make initial risky investments. The area gets greenlined for mortgage capital, and then a wave of reinvestment happens. Now it's finally time to make the leap from the abstract to the concrete. For the next 3 episodes, we're going to look at the gentrification of 3 US neighborhoods: the Lower East Side of Manhattan, Harlem, and Society Hill in Philly. Stay tuned.
Right on. Stay tuned. So I was gonna make this the episode 4, 5, and 6, but since he said that the next 3 episodes go together, I'm gonna cut this here and then do the next 3 episodes for next Monday in their little block. But yeah, so disinvestment and reinvestment, talking about gentrification, I think he does a pretty good job. So that's why I'm not cutting in and out quite as much. He's pretty funny, and I just let him go. But yeah, there it is. There you have it. We'll be back next Monday with Marxist Monday. Until then, keep getting your information from across the spectrum.